From the very beginning, Representative Barbara Ehardt has said her Fairness in Women's Sports Act has been about exactly that, protecting fairness in women's sports. Those who have passed it along this far in Idaho's legislature seem to agree. Those who disagree say it's about fear, specifically fear of something different, like transgender athletes. House Bill 500, which would prevent trans women from playing women's sports, was sent to the Senate floor earlier today. It's just another step in its month-long progression. The biggest concern, other than what some consider outright discrimination, is how the process of challenging an athlete's gender would go. Ehardt says she hears that, but it's not enough to stall the bill's advancement and allow Idaho to not allow transgender women or girls play on women's teams.
Representative Barbara Ehardt's bill allowing only biological women to play women's sports is now one step closer to becoming law. Earlier, it was sent to the Senate floor for amendments. Critics of the bill say it's transphobic to prevent trans women from playing in high school or college women's sports. Ehardt says this is about fairness in competition.
We can change our outside appearances, but we don't inherently change who we are physically with the DNA encoded in our bodies.
There were a lot of broken hearts in that room, a lot of disappointment, a lot of concerns.
Senator Cherie Buckner-Webb sits on the Senate State Affairs Committee. She, along with the other Democrat on the committee, voted against the bill today. But in the Republican-controlled Senate, it did pass out of committee along party lines. Senator Buckner-Webb says a major concern for her is the process of how an athlete would have to prove their gender if they were challenged.
No little girl, no young woman should have to have an invasive procedure or analysis done of her anatomy ever. It shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen in order to play sports.
Ehardt says that part of the amending process will make the bill's language more clear and concise, specifically how someone could challenge someone else's gender.
And try to make sure that we in no way make people think that somehow there's going to be invasive pelvic exams. That was not the case.
For Buckner-Webb, she hopes her colleagues in the Senate read up on the issue to better understand it before they debate or vote on it.
We have to be the purveyors of a more broad view of the world in order to be inclusive of all the folks in our state.
Ehardt says that she has no problem at all with people transitioning to the gender they feel suits them. She says she just wants women's sports to be fair.
Biological boys will still have the opportunity to compete. They will be able to compete on the side of which they are biologically identified with.
Well, I think it sends a message that you are less than. We don't value or respect you. We diminish your personhood. And that's an insult to all of us. I don't care where you come from or what you do. There's no one lesser than another.
We cannot physically compete with men. This is all strictly about sports. I support others in that which they want to do. I really do.
All right, Joe, so every step along the way in the committee, there's been an overwhelming, well, just overfilling the rooms for people wanting to testify. Was that the case today?
Well, again, we saw a lot of people show up to testify today, and today was actually continued from last week, an opportunity this morning for more testimony. Because of another bill that was taken up in committee, there wasn't time to get everybody through. There was pages and pages of people that had signed up to testify. Some say they feel like they aren't being heard because they weren't given an opportunity to speak in committee. Committee members, though, they did hear hours of testimony on House Bill 500, so you wonder at what point does people repeating themselves become an issue. But at the same time, I talked to legislators who say they really want to make sure all citizens are heard.
Okay, really quickly, though, this amending process, because if people want to look at that part where it's about the exam and questioning somebody's gender, how's that going to go?
So now that it'll go to the Senate for the amendments, that's where the whole body will essentially get to sit as a committee and make those amendments to kind of clarify anything in the bill. The whole bill is open to amendments, by the way. It's not just that one section we talked about. If there are amendments, the entire House would still have to sign off on it. This did pass the House a few weeks back. So the House has to sign off on the amendments. The Senate has to sign off on the amendments. And then from there, if that happens, it would go to the governor's desk.
All right, we'll see how it goes from here on out. Thank you, Joe. Well, unconstitutional or susceptible to lawsuit or not, this bill is advancing, heading to that full hearing on the Senate floor, as you heard Joe just say. But back before she even introduced this bill, Ehardt told us it was just about protecting women in women's athletics, regardless of whether there has been or will be an actual threat to roster spots anytime soon in Idaho. What is a threat, as the bill stands now, and if it doesn't get amended, as it's proving to be or starting to be, that invasive prove you're a girl clause. So says Chris Mosier, the first transgender athlete to represent the U.S. in international competition. He told us last week protecting women wasn't the first thing that came to his mind.
Transgender girls are girls, and they belong in girls' sports. You know, it's so interesting that that's the approach that she's taking, because what this bill would do is really put all women and girls, transgender and cisgender, in harm's way. You know, imagine being a young girl playing sports and being subjected to a pelvic examination if someone suspected that you weren't who you said you were. Imagine being 13 years old and having to undergo internal and external genital inspection to determine if you were girl enough to play sports. I don't understand how anyone would think that that is protecting women and girls.
We heard Ehardt say this isn't about a pelvic exam, and that probably will get pushed out and amended in this bill. But in the mid-1960s, in the height of the Cold War, and Eastern Bloc countries were in the middle of performing enhancing drugs, experimenting with those, that is, the International Association of Athletics Federations started testing female track and field athletes. You know how they did that? In the nude. They paraded them in front of a panel of doctors to prove they were women. And sure, you could say we've come a long way since those humiliating days. But with this bill moving one step closer to becoming the first law of its kind in the country, and one that will allow for any disputed athlete to have to prove their gender, you could also question whether we have come a long way.